Welcome, everyone, and happy Friday to each of you. We are just giving it a moment for our virtual learning community to get settled into this virtual space. We're so glad you're here. We don't take it for granted when people decide to spend this hour with us. So welcome to each of you. I invite you to go to the chat and let us know where you are joining the conversation from. It is always a treat for us to see the many different geographies that are represented. And we are pleased that oftentimes we even have individuals not only just throughout the United States, but also even some visitors outside of the US, and that excites us. We're so glad that you're here, and we look forward to delivering a rich conversation today and experience for each of you. I'll ask that you know that here at NWC, we really do value disability inclusion. And as a result, we do have closed caption that has been enabled for those that may benefit from it. So want to make sure that you are aware of that. For those of you who are new to our broadcast community, I am Dr. Nika White, and my pronouns are she, her. And I have the honor of serving as founder and lead principal consultant of NWC. And I want to shout out the NWC team who works tirelessly every single week and have done so for the past 5 years to bring this virtual learning experience to each of you. I also want to acknowledge that many individuals are joining us from LinkedIn Live. And so if you're not a part of our Zoom community, but you are checking us out on LinkedIn Live, we welcome you as well. Make sure that you're using the comment section. We are watching that closely, bringing over those thoughts, questions, sentiments into the Zoom chat so that we all can be connected. I also want you to know that if you're here as part of our Zoom community and you desire to have your cameras on, we do welcome that. We certainly love to see smiling faces, but we also know that many individuals are listening in while they're maybe multitasking. So whatever capacity in which you're here today, we are grateful and we appreciate your presence. If you are new to our community, this is an opportunity for us to address many different topics, but mostly we like to relate to topics of humanity. And when we think about humanity, it is all about intersecting conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership in business. And so we look forward to that being our focus for today. And we hope that you are ready for a riveting conversation. Once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations Podcast. We're so glad you're here. Let the conversations begin, indeed. And if you're just tuning in, you have tuned in to Intentional Conversations podcast. We're celebrating 5 years. And so we have taken the opportunity to really lean into this milestone by acknowledging all throughout the year many different opportunities to just appreciate the community and how we have been able to sustain this podcast, deepening people's knowledge and understanding of all things diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're so glad that you're a part of our community. I also want to extend a happy Ramadan to each of you who celebrate. We certainly love the idea of bringing forth different cultural observances to our broader community. We think that's important. And we are in the season where we're finding that this is the time for many different religious holidays to fall. And so we hope to be able to represent each of those as we acknowledge all of them. I also want you to be aware that we're still in the month of March, which means that it is Women's History Month. And so, yes, we will continue not only this month, but all throughout the year to find ways to acknowledge the many different wonderful contributions of women all over. And if that is something that is really dear to your heart, I encourage you to identify one or two women in your life that have really inspired you and maybe just reach out with words of encouragement and affirmation. It really will make a big difference. So March is also National Development Disabilities Awareness Month. And so we want to bring attention to that. We are keenly aware that people with disabilities, they contribute a lot to our society. And we want to make sure that we're doing all that we can to welcome them into the workplaces and into different spaces so that they can feel a sense of belonging. And so I want to make sure that you are aware of this national recognition. Now, Before I get to the opportunity of being able to give you the formal introduction of today's guest co-host, I want to take a moment to let you know who you have to look forward to seeing as our guest co-host on Intentional Conversations for this month. So we're going to be ending the month on March 28th with Tommy Paris, and Tommy is a wonderful practitioner in this space based out of the Tennessee area. And so I look forward to bringing her forward because she has a really great perspective around a lot of the different ways organizations are implementing effective diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, even in the midst of the political turmoil that we are seeing right now that is threatening the vitality and the efficacy of DEI. So I hope that you will join us at the end of the month for Tommy Paris. And as I've mentioned, this is our 5th-year anniversary. And so because of that, each quarter, we're doing something special. In addition to every Friday's offering of intentional conversations during this hour, we also are picking a date where in the evening, we are having what we're referring to as a reunion episode, bringing back some past speakers and guest co-hosts that have shared with us on our podcast. And so I'm excited because in the month of April, on the 15th to be exact, from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, John Graham and Emmanuel Kulu will be joining us for a conversation with myself. I hope that you will take advantage of joining us for that. My team will drop into the comment section if you're on LinkedIn Live and into the chat for those who are joining us by Zoom with the registration link for you to secure your spot and join us that evening. And I hope you also will share it out to others that you think would find this of interest. Now, it does me great pleasure to introduce today's guest co-host. One of the things that I love to do, if you've been with us for quite some time, a part of our community, is I believe in reading the person's bio. I think that it's important for our audience to know the accolades, the credentials, the experiences in which our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation with. And so that seems important to be able to read their official bio. And so I'm going to do that at this time, and then I will invite our guest co-host to greet you in her own way. So today is special. I'll just go ahead and preface this because Diya is not only just a colleague, but she is a friend. She is a sister in the work, and we have great rapport. So you're probably going to see a lot of that show through our conversations today. It's going to probably feel like two girlfriends catching up, but also deeply connected around this work and all of the work that remains to be done in this space. Diya Khanna is a global diversity, equity, and inclusion speaker, facilitator, consultant with 20 years experience in profit, nonprofit, and tech. She worked at Amazon where she led Core Plus, and Core stands for Conversations on Race and Ethnicity, an annual internal conference for, get this, 1.3 million employees. Yes, Diya did that. Her work is focused on developing DEI programs, strategies, policies at scale. She has developed global work plans for 14 employee resource groups and led courses on the future of work and how to rebuild workplaces from an intersectional lens. She is a proven subject matter expert and is known for big vision and tactical implementation. Diya has a lifelong mission of increasing access and opportunity of people across race, ethnicity, nationality, gender identity, accessibility, sexual orientation, social class, military, status, religion, age, and language in every professional industry. It felt important to name every single one of those. She has worked as a DEI consultant in Canada, Japan, Singapore, Germany, and the US. She was a DI columnist for the Seattle Times, which is actually where she's based. So it was really early from a timing standpoint. So we appreciate her getting up early on our behalf. She's also served as a board member of the Asian at Amazon Global Board and was appointed to the Seattle Women's Commission in 2018. Diya received her Bachelor of Journalism from Ryerson University and Master's of Education with a focus on curriculum development from the Comparative and International Development Education Center at the University of Toronto. She has published papers on anti-racism curriculum and multicultural education. So if you have been with us, you know that I'm going to ask you now as I stop sharing my screen to find those emojis, those reactions, those words of affirmation, whatever you can to help welcome our guest co-host today. I'm going to bring Diya into the spotlight so you all can see her. And before I release you, my friends, we do have a tradition here. And that tradition is we want our guest co-host to share with our audience, our community, something that we would not us know about you from hearing your bio, which we've just done, or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. Sometimes people will share a story and it can be anything, but I am so excited that you're here and I'm going to turn it over to you right now to greet this audience in your own way. Welcome, Diya.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Nika. It means everything for me to be on your show and in company with everybody that has joined us today. So thank you, everybody, for sharing your time and would love to check the chat thoroughly. So something about me that you may not know, I absolutely love 70s soul music. It is my heart. It is what just gets me going all the time. I have a record player and I buy all the records from that era. So it's everybody in my family loves DJing. We love pulling out those turntables and just scratching on a Friday night. So that's something that just moves me more than anything. And if music moves you, then we're all connected on that. Traveling
Yeah.
around the world, I try to buy a record everywhere I go. So sometimes you go to the discount bin and you can buy something in the $2 bin and come home and just put it on and it just sets the tone and the mood. So music is my uplifter, something you may not know, and I'm happy to share. So
I love that so much. And this is even news for me because
yeah.
I not aware that that was one of your pastimes is to
Yeah.
collect 70s records. And, I would say that record players have made a comeback in recent years. They have become very popular in terms of, people getting the tools and getting records and collecting them and even displaying them. I've seen that particularly in one of my friends' homes. And so they have definitely made a comeback. But yeah, I love how you acknowledge that music is kind of one of those universal connectors, right? We do connect around music, we do connect around food, and so um, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah,
So,
it's a way to just top up our cup. There's so much going on. So let's not forget
yes.
to take care of ourselves in the process and
Oh,
whatever makes us feel
yeah.
good, that's important. So
No, that is so important. And especially for those of us, because many members of our community are also practitioners in the space. Or if nothing else, at bare minimum, they are advocates and champions of the work, which means that for each of us, we carry a lot as we are navigating the complexities of all that comes with caring so much about humanity around, equity and belonging. And so finding those moments of joy, whether it's listening to 70s records or whatever it is critically important. So thank you for reminding us of that. Um, I want to bring to the conversation, Dia, something that has been troubling to me over the past week or so. And this is just to get some dialogue going and get your take on it. And I'll provide a little bit of colorful commentary for those that may not be aware. But there's been a little bit of infighting, for the lack of a better phrase, among the community of practitioners within this space, right? And specifically, what has been called out is more or less a criticism that um, kind of communicates the perceived lack of competence compared to DEI leaders that are within corporate spaces and directly doing the work internally for a specific organization. And I have been I have been troubled by that, and it just feels prudent to have a conversation with you as a friend, as a colleague, about what you're seeing, why you think it's happening, and what is your perspective on it. So,
yeah.
so first, let me just acknowledge, have you also been maybe privy to some of the what I'm speaking of? Okay. Okay. And for those in our community, if this is something that is new to you, then maybe as Dia and I dialogue about it, it'll help you to understand the importance of talking about it, because I'll have to be honest in saying there is a little bit of trepidation even bringing it up, because for those who aren't aware, it's almost like, are we exposing something about our work and our space that we really don't want out there? But I am showing up very vulnerable today and courageous from the standpoint of, I think that what we don't acknowledge, we can't really fix. And so, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
I'm so glad you brought this up because there's a
Yeah.
lot of things that are on our mind. within the industry, whether it's difference of opinions, how people are sharing their competencies and how they are received. And from my point of view, I believe that we all bring various competencies, various skills, various lived experiences, and we're stronger as a group and as a community. As we dialogue, you all will learn and see and witness that Nika and I are stronger together. We have embarked on work together. We've embarked on our relationship together, and we're all stronger because of you all joining this session today as well. So rather than looking at how well we show up individually, we'll never be able to do it all, right? And my skill set is in the communication side. Nika, you have a tremendous skill set in being able to convey the importance of humanity and relationship building and community to so many people from so many different backgrounds in such a succinct way. We're not in competition with each other, right?
No.
We're here collectively. So let's uplift each other, and let's also be aware of where perhaps our weaknesses may be, and lean on each other so that we can lift together. I just think that's so important to take that approach,
Yes.
not only in DEI, but in our lives. Let's lean into our village and let's do this work together. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And community is so important right now. And to your point, I think that sometimes we tend to extend criticism when there's a recognition of maybe areas where we aren't as strong in a particular discipline or space. And instead of seeing that as a threat, we need to see it as how do we now keep the focus on the main thing, which is impactful work, right? And if that means connecting with others that can help bridge a gap so that we can reach the end goal that we all are after, why would we not do that? You know, I think about the way in which you and I have collaborated. And just to bring an example to the forefront, very specifically, you and I do a lot of work together around designing these learning experiences. And what I always value, Dia, is that when it comes to us sitting down and really refining the content, the approach, what's going to find its way in, what's going to be taken out, you know, you and I are kind of on different ends of the spectrum, whereby I always say to you, I want them to get everything under the kitchen sink. I'm going to give them all. And you're like, no, Nika, we can't do that. And then you pull us back. But I value that relationship. I value the fact that we can collaborate in that regard to end up with such a great product. I, Dia, am also keenly aware that some of the criticism of practitioners in this space is a result of after George Floyd's murder, there were many individuals that saw an opportunity to um, label themselves as experts, right, overnight. And so I felt it important to acknowledge that because I don't think that the infighting is coming from just out of the blue. I think it is coming from a place and space where perhaps people have experienced some harm that has been done by maybe individuals that haven't been as well equipped, right, to do the work, and they've had to come back in and try to fix things. I have been in that situation. But what I'm also aware of is that right now, more so than ever, we need all of us engaged and surrounded by really reflecting on what can we do to move this work forward for our society. We all have to be a part of it. And I'm keenly aware that what drives and motivates one particular leader, one organization, it varies. And so even if our styles are different, I think that's appropriate. There is merit to having diversity within the space of diversity, right? And so I wanted to also bring that to the conversation. You're nodding. So it tells me that maybe we're in agreement in some regard. So
Oh,
please let's hear your voice on
absolutely.
this.
You had mentioned when we work together, we respectfully challenge each other, and
Yes.
there's a wonderful visual of how we want to be in places of discomfort. You actually learn and grow in places of discomfort as long as they're safe places of discomfort, so we can create
Yes.
for each other. Another difference that you and I have as a Canadian, I bring a different lens, and
Yes.
what I've experienced being brought up in Canada may be different than what you've experienced being brought up in the US. An Asian woman, a Black woman, there's so many differences. So
Mhm.
instead of disregarding those differences, let's bring them all to the table and then let's extend that dialogue towards our goal. It's so important to stay centered on our values and what we're looking to achieve together collectively and do challenge each other. I absolutely lean
Absolutely.
into that, but let's do it in a way that's respectful and mindful of each other's competencies rather than saying those competencies don't count, right? There is no one single toolkit that we bring a variation thereof. And so the more we have, the more abundant we are. The more abundant we are, the more we can achieve together. So happy to
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. I just want to acknowledge some of what's happening into the chat. We're so fortunate to have an incredible community. And Andrea is someone that routinely shows up for our shows on Friday, but she says community is more important than ever. All of that other stuff is majoring in minors, and we should be saving our time and energy for other things to move this work forward. And I think that is a great note to end that particular conversation on, because that is it. That is what we need everyone to walk away with. Absolutely. Our energy is better spent on fighting who we truly need to be fighting and not on infighting. So thank you for that commentary. So I to something else, and again, we're probably going to be all off script today, just because this is how Dia and I flow. But one of the projects that you and I have had the fortune of working on together, and I often refer to this body of work as some of the most rewarding in my professional career, and I really mean that. As a woman of color, I love pulling together a community of practice of women of color and helping them to navigate in spaces where they feel affirmed and safe and understood and valued and empower them. And so through some of our partnership work with clients that we have, we've been able to collaborate on what does that experience look like? How do we make sure that we're meeting their needs and we're curating these learning sessions that allow the women to learn with and from each other, but that also positions them to control what they can control? Because we know that while empowering women with different tools and skills and knowledge, that is only a part of solving for the greater issues that often keep women, particularly women of color, undervalued in the workplaces. Also there has to be a shift in the organizational systems, but it is a way of helping to the women to feel a bit more in control over what they can impact. And so I just talk a little bit about what has your experience been as you and I have worked together with these communities of practice around women of color, and why do you, and maybe if the question should be, if you feel like there is a threat to those types of programs right now based upon what we're seeing in the political realm.
Yeah. Well, first, the community of practices that we are involved in brings together a collective of tremendous women with just a range of skill sets.
Mm,
In there, the energy that we encounter tells us so much that there's an excellence there and there's a hope there for women involved to be able to showcase those skills. What we're seeing is a challenge to those programs, and that's hard to watch because
yes.
community takes time to develop. And as you and I know, it comes in layers. At first, there's that initial opening up, getting to know one another, and then we deepen those relationships. And then we get to a place where we can have those meaningful conversations. We can start to share each other's skills and advocate for another.
Yes.
When we see a challenge to those programs, it feels as if there's a disruption to that flow. And that's a little, it can be hard to watch. Yes, everybody, if those programs start to fall off, there's an opportunity for people to continue to engage with each other, but there is an intentionality behind
Right.
the practice, the communities together that it comes often with I mean, just even the logistical side of having it on a consistent basis. You yourself
Yes.
having done these sessions, these calls, these interviews, co-hosting for 5 years now, you know that we build with time. So let's give each other
Yes.
that runway to be able to spend time with one another so that we can see the real impacts of community. Community doesn't come overnight. Yeah.
No, it doesn't. And I think it's something important to be said about the the safety and the feeling protected and affirmed. Um, I as a woman of color, as a Black woman, I am keenly aware of my nervous system and what's happening when I'm in spaces where I feel safe, I feel affirmed, I feel protected, I feel understood, versus in spaces where um, I don't feel safe. I feel the opposite of that. And I think that if you are not someone that's a part of a historically disenfranchised, marginalized community, that doesn't cross your mind. You've had the privilege of that not even crossing your mind, right? And so it leads to this situation where organizations, unless someone brings it to their attention, they don't even consider these types of very intentionally curated programs for different populations. And then when you take that and you add on the lack of value that is being placed right now on programs that are targeting specific groups that are marginalized, it's disheartening because it feels like now we potentially could be at no place of return, at least within this current administration, right? Because a lot of even the private organizations are taking their cues from what's happening within, the federal government. And so um, what do you think would be some solutions in the interim when organizations pull back from those types of opportunities? What can women do on their own to help again position themselves for that type of really strong community of practice?
I think one of the things that women can do is start shifting the perspective of I'm taking somebody else's time to I'm giving somebody else perspective. However, which way we share our thoughts and experiences, when we frame it as here's something you may not know about me, here's something you may not know about my community. When you
Yeah.
create these spaces for us to share, here's how everybody can benefit. Those conversations we're not taking from an organization when we're sharing that. We're actually giving them the perspective that they may not see. Lean into examples. Even in this conversation, you'll see Nika and I dropping the names of people who are leaders. We're stronger when there's more of us with the same message. And I'm happy to give examples as an Asian woman. The support I've received from Black women has been absolutely
Mm,
incredible. You described us in a sisterhood together, and I deeply, deeply feel that because there's been challenges that I've faced. And yes, I've gotten my opinion out and shared it in a number of different ways, whether it's through speaking, through writing. But it's when we approach our challenges together as a community and say, I may not have experienced this, but I'm familiar or there's similarities in what I experience to what this other person has experienced. And here's why we need to invest in community. When you hear it from somebody in addition to the person who's impacted, that's when people start listening. So I think that there's a real opportunity there. Yeah.
yeah. It goes back to the importance of storytelling, right? It is one of the very few ways that gets us proximate to someone else's lived experience. And through that, we are building and deepening our empathy, our perspective, our understanding, and hopefully our care and concern, right? To be able to want to lift as we're climbing. And so I think that's really important. So one of the key takeaways then is if you find yourself in an organization that is pulling back from maybe the very intentional communities of practice for very specific groups, then there's still some things that you can do. Don't let your perspective fall by the wayside just because that formal community of practice maybe no longer exists. And I so appreciate that message because I do think that many of us kind of feel like, well, oh well, if it goes away, then there's nothing we can do at all. And I do want us to make sure we're leaning into some of the personal responsibility that we may want to hold ourselves accountable to, right, for those purposes.
And I'd love to add one thing, Nika. Let's pick and choose. I think
Yeah,
the
yeah,
advice is often shared. Hey, speak up, share, just say it anyways.
yeah,
I think it's a little bit more complicated than
yeah.
that. Let's take care of if sharing comes at the cost of our own safety, it
Right.
will not be the time to share. So let's pick and choose when it is the time. But I encourage women and marginalized groups to do this all the time. If somebody is speaking up, drop in the emoji, drop in the +1, say publicly, you know, I want to draw attention to what Nika said here. The person who's sharing it will appreciate that so much when they feel as if they're not the only one that's sharing those thoughts or what it is that they're looking for. So
I
wake people
agree.
up when they say what they say so that they're not saying it alone in an echo chamber.
No, absolutely. And the volume of that carries a lot of weight. And so, yeah, find whatever courage to show up for those individuals. Because, again, we're protecting the full turf when we do that. It may be one person kind of taking the risk to actually say it, but when we amplify that, we're definitely giving credence to that perspective and that point of view. So I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dia. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit now about your journey into this work. I mean, of course, as I read your bio, you have great level of experience, not only just from the US, from a DEI perspective, but global perspective. And we know that intercultural competence, intercultural intelligence is critically important. And that's something that I think that you bring incredibly well to the work that you do. And so tell us a little bit about your consultancy and the clients that you support, and what you're seeing in terms of maybe pivots that perhaps you've had to make over the past, several months as we've been dealing with a lot.
Yeah. So my journey actually started in journalism, and I began in the space. My skill set is writing and communication, actually even broadcast journalism. So
Mhm.
media is a window into the worlds that we may not be familiar with. And in the time that I was in that space, and I still continue to write for a few publications, but I realized there's so many amazing stories out there, and there's also amazing stories that we haven't heard yet, or we're not aware of yet. There's pieces that we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. I like to think of it as a receipt that's buried in a pile of paper. It's there, but we may not necessarily find it right away.
Yes.
And what I started to discover as I began this journey in journalism is that even when some of those stories were told, a lot of them were told in one-dimensional ways. So I'll give an example. Uh, we in the media, some of the media outlets that I was working at, we would begin to interview Muslims post 9/11. Following a lot of those interviews, we would reach out to the same people that we had contacted to talk about immigration. So the story was centered around the same piece. And that sparked something in me that within our institutions, within our workplaces, it's so important to give people the opportunity to showcase their multitude of skills and not just silo them into one place. And so I met with a mentor who's now a Canadian senator, and she has been in the DEI space for many years. And she said, it's so important to bring down the barriers, remove the barriers, and create the opportunity. So I like to think of it as a gear shift and
Mhm.
allow people the opportunity to showcase their excellence. We
Yeah.
call this equity of opportunity. What people do with it, that's up to, let's see, that depends on a combination of hard work, how willing they are to do that. But let's remove the barriers so that they can showcase that. And she always said approach this from a place of humility. So as much as you think you know, there's so many pieces that you
Right.
don't know. So always be willing to learn and grow. As I began moving around the world for different work opportunities, I started applying that lens of humility. It's so important to say, I don't know it all, right? There's so many pieces that I can learn from, so many people that I can learn from. And a pivotal moment for me was when I joined a large tech company and I realized that there's an operational side to this. So it's
Mhm.
also about how to take it to scale. And that was a pivotal moment for me. And from there, I started my consultancy where now I do those three buckets. So speaking, advising, and consulting and facilitating, I apologize. And so that's when I started working with different clients across the world. But DEI is an umbrella. So it's important to couple that with what it is that we do well and then deliver that to our client. So that's
Yeah.
where I am now. And it's a combination of working in community. So often those projects that I embark on, they're not done alone, they're done in combination with other DEI consultants so that we bring collectively X number of years of experience, we bring this pool of skill sets, and then the client can really benefit from that.
I love that. I love that. I know that we certainly have lots of experience with just exactly what you named. I love words, I love language, and I pay attention to it. And so you said equity of opportunity, and that just caught my attention. I love that. And I think that there's something powerful about the framing there. Do you want to expound a little bit further?
Yeah, equity of opportunity. So opportunity is getting in. It's that access point. And imagine you are a juggler. I'm just going to give an example, but you've never had an opportunity to showcase your juggling. So
Right.
it's that same piece. Give people an opportunity to showcase their skills and let's see what they do with it. Even this conversation right now is an opportunity for me to share my path, my skills, my work. And without that opportunity, it often hangs in the shadows in our structural spaces. There are people that have more access to others. Some of us may be familiar with the term affinity bias, where we tend to gather around others with shared interests, shared similarities. It's not necessarily an intentional exclusion, but it does happen. So when we open those access points, it's not about people just it's about people being able to show what they've been working on, what they've developed excellence around, and then we are all better for that. So equity,
Absolutely.
opportunity, yeah.
I love that framing because, I think that you probably can attest to the fact that when we talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's the equity piece that often is most complex for individuals. But, talking about it as access to opportunity and then doing so where we are providing practical examples, like the simple examples that you gave just a moment ago, I think that it helps to open people's minds, and so I love that that has found its way into how would you like to advise, facilitate, teach, and coach in this space. Um, so I mentioned in your bio that you've actually executed a conference for 1.3 million employees. And while that sounds incredibly daunting, I'm sure that it was, but maybe just call out 2 to 3 key things that you learned from that experience as you were putting together this conference for so many people um, throughout the organization that you're part of. This was at Amazon, is that correct?
And that's correct. Yeah, thank you for that. One of the pieces that I learned is that people are in different parts of their learning journey. So rather than looking at it as people are in the conversation or out of the conversation, it's where are they when they're joining the
Yeah,
conversation? It's a spectrum. That allows us to look at the teachings and learnings as an opportunity rather than, okay, these are people that are no not worthy of reaching out to, and these are people that are. Everybody can be impacted by a conversation. My dear friend and colleague Sasha Thompson often refers to them as aha moments. And she has taught me that when you give examples, don't limit it to one example, give a number of examples. Lean into storytelling. Storytelling
yeah,
is so powerful when we share the impact of DEI work. And the first example may not resonate, the second may not, but somewhere in that range of examples, something will land with somebody. And initially, it may be a spark, but that spark after our time together is done, people will start thinking about it. And then
yeah.
you start researching a little bit on what we've said. So
Mhm.
allow people the space to be on their journey. And we are here to support. But the other piece, so the first one is that people are in different parts of their journey. The second piece that I noticed, and I'd love to share with this group, is there's power in asking questions. So when we are sharing content, when we're delivering on anything, rather than tell, ask. It could be a prompt. It could be, hey, have you been in this position? Even just placing that question in play there will allow people the opportunity to just look out and say, hey, I have experienced something similar to this, or somebody that I love have experienced something similar to this. So that's the second piece. And the third piece that I wanted to share is when you're working with such a wide group of people across often different identities, different locations, is that there's nuance differences in how we approach this work. It could be in the language. It could be in how our nonverbal communication, I believe they say 85% of communication is nonverbal. It's those differences. There are similarities, but there are differences. So rather than saying there's one particular way of doing things, invite those differences. That's why we often lean into the chat. We want to hear from others, is lean into people's different ways of communicating and sharing.
So I'm taking notes, and hopefully our community here sees why I love collaborating and working with you. I think that what you just shared is really critical. And while you were talking about it in the context of planning this conference for 1.3 million employees, I think that conceptually the idea of how in which we approach any type of learning experience for a group of people that are across different backgrounds, different points, entry points within their journey, that we have to have that lens. We have to have that lens of acknowledging that people learn and receive information in different ways. So how are we diversifying the modalities? How are we diversifying the method of instruction? And so I love that. And that is where I think a lot of organizations fail to be as effective as they could be in optimizing the learning experiences, is because they'll do like a one and done. And it's a one size traditional fit all, a lecture, and then people are kind of in the audience, and then, they expect for all the change that the learning session was to create is going to happen overnight. And so often when you and I collaborate, we always talk about it's not just about a singular one and done. It is about a learning path. It is about, recognizing what are the behavioral changes that we want to see occur, and how do we activate that in consideration of all the different dimensions of diversity in the audience. And so I heard you say the first is to recognize that people are on different journeys. The second is to, I love this one, tell versus ask. Let's ask really great questions. Yeah. I often say that we spend way too much time making definitive statements and not nearly enough time asking thoughtful questions. That in and of itself is part of the learning, the perspective that's being brought forth. And then thirdly, acknowledge and embrace the nuance and invite that type of difference in. Because again, it's not a one size fits all. And I appreciate Toki in our community who also took advantage of sharing that into
Yeah,
the
thank you, Tony.
chat.
That's what I've seen, because when you're working with that many number of people, wow, you see a range of differences, and it humbles you too, because you're one person and there's a team with you. But the people who are receiving it, they bring a number of different ways of receiving it. Along with my journalism background, I have an education background, and what we learned is that there's actually 7 different learning styles. And you can see how that becomes further contextualized when we bring in our identities, our experiences, even, and I don't want to overlook this, but those that are over different identities, biculturally. So rather than looking at, and it's tough because we want to try to get, we want to try to reach as many people as possible. But if you're not reaching people right away, please don't think that it's not reaching them with time. Things ruminate, things sit with us. It may not be immediately. It may the moment of realization may not land immediately, but it will stay with them. So give ourselves the time and the grace to allow people to step away and say, okay, this sat with me. And maybe they come across some situation at some point in their life and they reflect back and they think, oh, now I didn't think of it this way. And here's something I could do in this situation. So definitely that time, space, and grace is important. Yeah.
Absolutely. I like to refer to it as strategic patience, right? We want the thing to happen immediately because that's the society that we live in, and we're just all so fast paced. But there's so much value and the power of the pause for people to really kind of be reflective in the moment, as well as the power of allowing people to step away and to process, maybe even with some resources like tools and recaps and summaries, and so they can continue their own personal learning journey. But I think that is such a big point to amplify, because you and I probably have experienced more times than we can count where organizations are really looking for one singular experience to deliver all the things immediately. Not only all the things, but all the things immediately. And that is just not how this works.
No.
Not at all. Not
No,
at all.
no, there's too
Um,
much. There's too much. That's our life's work. Everybody's life's work is being able to become better. And so it's not going to happen immediately. And now you all can see why I love working with Nika as well. And as you were talking, I was writing this down as well, the power of the pause. There was another piece that you had mentioned recently in our conversation with one another. It's we are learning together as to how to do this, but let's also take the pressure off of ourselves to think that it's single-handedly our responsibility to shift
hey,
anybody's mindset entirely. It's not. One piece I would love to add is when we do offer toolkits or resources, remember Google is at everybody's fingertips. We are inundated with information. I can tell you this from a journalism perspective. The best value you can offer in a toolkit or in resources is prompts. Sometimes less is more, rather than feeding people a massive information that they can
mm,
probably find themselves. Allow them the opportunity to reflect on some questions that will get their minds thinking in a way that they haven't thought before. I found that's very powerful in allowing people the opportunity to shift their thinking their own way, right?
yes,
That's how I would
yes.
follow up with that piece. Yeah.
And I'd venture to say with great confidence that that is one of your superpowers. The less is more. When I need to cull something down because I'm like, I want to give them everything because I'm so passionate about they have to have everything, you're the first person that I think of to like be a thought partner with me. Help me to think about what are the most critical those
Likewise,
points of
likewise.
information that we need to center this learning experience or this conversation around. And it's like you said, sometimes we are set on trying to change people's hearts and minds and the behavior. And it is also a win if once we step away for some type of learning experience, for there to only be, some kind of compliance to the behavior that is appropriate. That is a win too. Sometimes we beat ourselves up because we're like, well, they don't believe it. Okay, but it is a win that now they're at least conceding to the organization's culture standard of how they should be showing up and behaving, right? And then the other, that takes time, let them process. Maybe the other portions of it, the heart and the mind, will also kind of come along with it. So I love that. We're getting close to the end of time, Dia. And so I just want to give this audience an opportunity to share your questions, your thoughts, whatever curiosities are bubbling up for you. We want to give you a moment to express that. Or perhaps you just want to contribute a resource or a perspective to the conversation that Dia and I are having today. We want to invite you to do that. You can do so if you're part of our Zoom community by using the raise hand feature that lets me know that you are willing for me to call upon you. And if your camera is on, I will also add you to the spotlight. Or certainly leverage the chat, place your questions there. If you're on LinkedIn Live, not to worry, place your questions into the comment section. We're watching that closely. We'll bring it over into our discussion here based upon the time that we have allotted. So I'm going to give you all a second just to kind of percolate on that. Think about what perhaps you'd like to contribute or ask while I go to the next question. And this is more of a statement, I guess. And I would just love to get your thoughts on this. So, as long as we've been working together, it's interesting that when I read your bio, I'm still learning so much about you. And I'm also recognizing the similarities kind of in our pathway. So, when you talked about the journalism background, I went through the J school. That was my undergraduate degree, was in the J school. And my track was not so much of the broadcast, it was the PR, the marketing communications. And so, I know that you and I both value conversations of communications and how in which we do this work, because we realize that it's not just about helping people to understand these constructs, but it's equally about how are we controlling the narrative? How are we trying to make sure that we are, not letting resistance to come into play by providing the clarity that's needed? How are we bringing people along so that all the misinformation that needs to be unlearned happens? And so I think that's something that we share. And from an education perspective background, we also share the experience of instructional design, adult learning, right? And I think we've talked about that before as well. That's what my master's degree was in. And so we're pulling a lot of our similar backgrounds together to create magic. And I do call it magic very intentionally, because if you were to see Dia and I in action, it is beautiful. It really is. But all because of what she shared, just that level of trust and collaboration and recognizing and respecting each other's strengths and weaknesses. And so do you want to comment on that, Dia?
Yeah, exactly what you said, that there's those similarities and then there's also the differences that we bring in, and that
Yes.
shows up in the approach, often shows up in, it shows up in the details. So I say, hey, have you thought about it this way? And what about this way? And this sounds like a great point. And then with the time that we have, is this how we want to use it? So you can have similarities with somebody, but always invite the differences, respect, and challenge each other respectfully, and your work will be better because of it. Again, coming back to that, we want the discomfort. Discomfort can help us learn and grow as long as we're in a safe place. And I think that two minds are always better than one. A community is the best. So let's lean into one another and be vulnerable. And Nika, you have displayed this probably better than anybody I know in the DEI space, which is I'm approaching it this way. Let me know what you think. So
Yeah.
openness to that feedback, as long as you're doing it with somebody that you trust and have that relationship with,
That's
you can start with family, friends, anybody, and then grow that a little bit. Vulnerability is a strength, as Brene Brown says, and so many others. So let's lean into that as long as we're doing it with people that we know will be using that and respecting that, and not just using it against us. So I think that's key.
right. I totally agree. I think that one of the reasons that difference creates so much divide for us in society is because of how we as humans sometimes classify difference. Like you just said, let's welcome the difference. Let's also appreciate the differences while also leaning into where are those strong points and superpowers that certainly should be amplified and leveraged in this type of partnership opportunity. But we classify difference as like right, wrong, good or
Yeah.
bad, inferior,
Binary,
and
completely.
not just as different, and different in a way to where there's value to that difference. And I think there's something to be said for unpacking that for people. Why do we just gravitate towards something being different as wrong, bad, less than? And I don't know. Have you found some tricks for being able to shift people's mindsets around that?
I think one of the best ways to shift our mindset is to be around that difference, and it can start off
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
our own communities. Always invite somebody that may not have been there otherwise if they weren't
Yeah.
there by invitation, and start feeling comfortable in that difference. You had mentioned in my bio that I had lived in a couple of places. Every time you move somewhere new, you're surrounded by difference. In fact, you may be the different person. So instead of seeing it as a threat, see it as an opportunity and embrace yourself with that the new feelings, those feelings of nervousness that you may have around difference, it's natural. And I promise you, you'll learn more because of it. So as a Canadian, having lived in Germany, it was very eye-opening to me to experience what I experienced in the time that I was there, which is very different than somebody who lived there perhaps 50 years before I did. So remember that people and cultures and identities, they're not stagnant. They're always changing themselves. We are all on a journey. And
Absolutely.
to look at it through a lens of fluidity, everything is changing in real time rather than, okay, this is something, checkbox, I've understood it, move on. Embrace the ambiguity, embrace the complexity, and then share it in ways that are digestible. So we don't want to share it in ways that are easy, but digestible. Digestible is through those prompts and questions. So, hey, have you been somewhere new? What were the experiences that you had? That's when we spark the conversation towards change.
Mm. No, I love this. It's reminding me, I'm not seeing any questions so far, so I'm going to keep rolling in the limited time that we have left, but I am watching for it. So just keep percolating. But it reminds me, as you were talking about ambiguity, of sessions that we recently collaborated on for a community of practice of women of color, and it was all around VUCA, right?
Yeah,
So,
I've
yeah.
referenced it a few times now. I wonder. maybe we can share it here because that
Yeah.
would go.
And why don't you just give like a high level overview because it definitely addresses the ambiguity piece that so many of us are having to navigate along with the uncertainty. So just at a really, really high level, let's make sure this community at least understands what VUCA is.
So VUCA stands for volatility. So each letter is a letter of the acronym. V for volatility, U for uncertainty, C for, I believe it's
Is it complexity?
yes, yes, and A for ambiguity. And this really resonated with a lot of people, a lot of the women that we worked with at marginalized identities, because they said, this explains the feeling of overwhelm that I'm going through, that's struggling going to sleep. It's just that feeling of not knowing what's coming around the corner. And so one way to reframe it is through alternative acronyms. So V for vision, U for have to look that one up, but
I
C,
put you on the spot here.
that's right. Yes. C for clarity and A for agility. So yes, we are in times that are, there's a lot of ambiguity. We can learn from ambiguity. This is not to disparage the impact that it has on us. It absolutely does. But there is also an opportunity to learn how to navigate these waters, these spaces, and to share those practices with each other in the spaces that we've had together. Nobody had one single answer, I can promise you that. But it was in the sharing that somebody said, hey, I haven't thought about this. And in the sharing, it wasn't just about the individual 5 minute, 10 minute, half an hour actions. It was more the structural practices that we can engage in and how that can help us. So there
I'm
is
looking at,
opportunity.
so what was the new word for you? I think U stands for uncertainty.
Answer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So I've actually shared that acronym into the chat, but yeah, and I know that it's becoming a more and more popular content area for learning sessions just because of all that we are having to experience and navigate right now. But I do think that it is great upskilling around leadership in spaces where we don't always have the answers, you know. And I think that it forces us as leaders to also think about how can we lean into that vulnerability and see it as a strength and not as a weakness, because sometimes we often perceive we have to have all the answers and have them immediately. And one of the greatest ways to build trust is to be able just to acknowledge, I don't know. I'm experiencing some of the same trepidation and concerns maybe as the next person. And so, okay,
Question on
looking at the chat to make
the
sure I was getting
reframe.
it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna look up the reframe, but it's
Vision
vision.
for, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I think I misunderstood the question. Okay. The
The
reframe.
reframe is vision, understanding, clarity, and agility.
Agility. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
thanks for that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so we have like 3 minutes left, Dia,
Yeah,
and we this conversation could go on, but I want to give you an opportunity to close us out in whatever way that feels appropriate to you. I would love for you maybe to share anything that experiencing a lot of energy and positivity around lately that's on the horizon for you, or that you're just caring deeply about and spending some deep moments of reflection around. Share with us what we have not talked about today that you think is important to socialize with this community.
sure. So I would love to talk about the piece around cultural humility. I think for a long time, we in the US have absolutely had so much to share and to teach and to learn. But as a global citizen, I think that there's a tremendous opportunity, not only in looking at those from various cultures as also having something to offer, but what we can learn from other cultures. I think that
Of
there
course.
3.25% of the population is in the US. And yes, there's so much happening here. As we are navigating the uncertainty in our country, let's also look to what other areas of the world are doing from a place of humility. So let's listen, let's ask questions, let's surround ourselves with that. I think that cultural humility is a tremendous way to learn what is working for others, and also to humble ourselves to say, okay, we don't have all the answers. we're not necessarily the best country in the world. There is no best country in the world. There is no best anything in the world. Let's be in a place of learning and growing. Ask those questions. You can gain more friends, more people, those in your community from questions than 3 years of telling about yourself. So Nika, in closing, I would just love to ask you, how are you navigating this space? Because
Oh,
that's an example of how to shift the question back to you. How are you doing right now?
yeah. I appreciate you so much, Dia, and I hope that you know that. So I think that the only way is to remain hopeful. Do I have my days? Do I have my moments? Absolutely. But I feel that without hope, we are not able to position ourselves to be able to leverage the positive energy in appropriate ways, right? And so I have released myself of the expectation that I am to solve it all for everybody, right? But where I do and have influence and impact, I'm leaning completely into that. And a lot of that is about the communities, again, connecting with people that there's great level of synergy and then putting your superpowers together to be able to continue the work. And so definitely a lot of pivots. But I will never abandon the work. I mean, I think there's a way to continue to do the work without having to necessarily use the words that have been weaponized. Um, but most importantly, I'm remaining hopeful. And I wish that for all of us, because again, there's so much power in maintaining that sense of hope when we are finding ourselves maybe at really and hard days. So yeah, I think hope is the answer right now.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And thank you, everybody, for being in community with us. We see the chat. Absolutely. Yes. Cultural humility was developed by two women of color and in the healthcare space. So definitely want to give acknowledgement to that. Please do look up the framework VUCA. And yes, it's been wonderful, wonderful to connect with all of you, to see your comments. Nika, to you in closing. So
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dia. Again, we don't take it lightly when people say yes to our invitation. And I have so enjoyed this conversation. I hope that you all will join us again next week for another episode of Intentional Conversations. We're going to share Dia's LinkedIn and some other information into the chat. I do hope that you will reach out and connect directly. And until next time, be safe and be healthy. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you so much.
all right, take care.